The meeting hall on Nexus Prime stretched so wide that Daeho could barely see the far walls. Thousands of alien beings filled the massive space, their voices creating a low hum that never stopped. Some looked like giant lizards with sharp teeth. Others glowed like living crystals. A few floated in the air without any visible means of support. Daeho sat in the smallest chair in the entire hall. The seat was meant for species much larger than humans, so his feet barely touched the floor. Around him, alien delegates towered over his position like trees around a small bush. He had been Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Coalition for 3 years now, and every day felt the same. Nobody listened to him. Nobody cared what humans had to say. The matter of mining rights in the Theta sector will now be discussed, announced the speaker, a massive creature that looked like a cross between an octopus and a mountain. Its voice boomed across the hall without any need for amplification. General Kethler of the Vorthak Empire stood up. His scales caught the light from the chamber's artificial suns, making him look even more impressive than usual. The Vorthak claimed this sector by right of strength. Our fleets are the strongest in the galaxy. Our warriors are the bravest. We have earned this territory through countless victories. Murmurs of agreement came from the Vorthak section. Their delegation took up nearly a quarter of the hall, all of them wearing armor that could probably stop a tank shell. Overseer Zithara of the Ethereal Collective rose next. She was beautiful in an alien way, her crystalline body refracting light into rainbow patterns. The collective objects. Our technology is far superior to crude Vorthak methods. We can extract resources without damaging the planetary ecosystems. Logic demands that we be granted these rights. More murmurs, this time from the crystal beings who made up another large section of the hall. Their technology was indeed impressive. Daeho had seen their ships, which moved without any visible engines and could apparently bend space itself. The debate went on for hours. Species after species stood up to make their claims. Each one talked about their strength, their technology, their ancient rights, or their military power. Nobody mentioned humans. Nobody asked what Earth might want or need. Daeho raised his hand several times, but the speaker never called on him. This was normal. In 3 years, he had been allowed to speak at exactly 7 meetings. Each time, the other delegates had listened politely for about 30 seconds, before finding excuses to move on to more important matters. After the meeting ended, Daeho walked through the corridors of the Coalition headquarters. The building was designed for beings much larger than humans, so everything felt oversized and intimidating. He passed groups of aliens discussing trade deals, military alliances, and scientific exchanges. None of them included humans in their plans. Back on Earth, things were very different. Hee-Jin worked late into the night in her laboratory, surrounded by blueprints and computer screens. She was one of Earth's best engineers, and she had been working on humanity's first real interstellar ships for 2 years. The designs were finally ready, and the test results were incredible. The fusion drive efficiency is up another 12%, she told her assistant, pointing at the numbers on her screen. These engines are actually producing more energy per unit of fuel than anything the Coalition uses. Her assistant looked surprised. Really? But their antimatter engines are supposed to be the most advanced technology in the galaxy. Hee-Jin smiled. That's what they think. But look at these calculations. Our fusion process is cleaner, more stable, and requires less exotic materials. We could build 10 of our ships for the cost of one of theirs. She had sent her reports to the Coalition Science Council 6 months ago. So far, she had received exactly one response. A polite message explaining that the Council was too busy to review preliminary research from developing species at this time. On the other side of the planet, Taewoo was discovering something equally amazing in the depths of Earth's oceans. His submersible had descended to places where the pressure should have crushed any living thing, where the temperature was hot enough to boil water, and where no sunlight had ever reached. Yet life was everywhere. These bacteria are incredible, he said into his recorder, watching microscopic organisms dance in front of his camera. They're not just surviving in conditions that would kill any known Coalition species. They're thriving. The chemical processes they use could revolutionize energy production, medicine, even space travel. Taewoo had been sharing his discoveries with xenobiologists throughout the galaxy. Most of them responded with polite disinterest. A few suggested that human research methods were probably flawed, since such extreme life forms were obviously impossible. In a secure facility outside Seoul, Young-soo studied reports from across the galaxy. He was Earth's chief military strategist, though the Coalition didn't think humans needed military strategists. After all, humans were a peaceful species that had never faced real conflict. At least that's what the aliens believed. Young-soo knew better. Human history was full of wars, conflicts, and struggles that had forced humanity to become incredibly good at fighting and surviving. The aliens saw human peace as weakness. They didn't realize it was a choice, not a limitation. If war comes, he told his team, we need to be ready. The Coalition thinks we're harmless farmers and scientists. That could be our greatest advantage. His plans were theoretical for now, but they were detailed and comprehensive. Young-soo had studied every Coalition military doctrine, every battle tactic, every strategic principle the aliens used. Most of their approaches were thousands of years old, unchanged and rigid. They fought the way their ancestors had fought, using the same formations and the same thinking. Humans fought differently. Humans adapted. Meanwhile, in a small laboratory in Tokyo, Nari was working on something that could change everything. Quantum physics had always fascinated her, especially the strange way particles could be connected across vast distances. The Coalition had never mastered quantum communication because their technology had developed along different lines. They relied on faster-than-light travel and powerful transmitters instead. If this works, Nari whispered to herself, watching her instruments carefully. We could talk to anyone, anywhere in the galaxy. Instantly, the math was incredibly complex, but Nari had always been good with impossible equations. Her professors used to joke that she thought in mathematics instead of words. Now, that strange skill might give humanity something the mighty Coalition had never achieved. 3 years had passed since first contact, and the aliens still saw humans as simple, weak, and unimportant. They offered protection and guidance, treating humanity like children who needed supervision. The Coalition had even prepared a special world for human colonization, a place where they could live safely under alien protection. What the Coalition didn't understand was that humans had never needed protection from anyone. They had survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and disasters that would have destroyed weaker species. They had spread across an entire planet, adapting to every environment from frozen wastelands to burning deserts. Now they were about to spread across the galaxy. The aliens just didn't know it yet. On Nexus Prime, Daeho finished his daily report to Earth. Another day of being ignored. Another day of watching the galaxy's powers make decisions without human input. He had learned to be patient, but he was also learning other things. He was learning how the Coalition really worked, who had power and who didn't, and most importantly, how to recognize weakness disguised as strength. The aliens thought they knew everything about humans. They were about to discover how wrong they were. 4 years had passed since the first human ships landed on Haven's Rest. The planet was supposed to be a simple agricultural world where humans could live quietly under Coalition protection. Instead, it had become something that surprised everyone, especially the aliens who were watching. So Young stood on the observation deck of New Seoul, the colony's main city, and looked out at what her people had built. Where the Coalition's experts said it would take 20 years to establish basic civilization, humans had created thriving cities in just 4 years. The skyline stretched to the horizon, filled with buildings that seemed to grow naturally from the landscape. The efficiency reports are in, her assistant told her, holding a tablet full of numbers. Food production is up 300% from initial projections. Manufacturing is ahead of schedule. Population growth is stable and healthy. So Young nodded, but she wasn't surprised. Humans had always been good at making impossible things work. The Coalition had given them a planet with challenging weather, difficult soil, and limited resources. They had expected humans to struggle just to survive. Instead, humanity was flourishing. Dong Hyun walked through the streets of New Seoul, watching the morning rush as people headed to work. He had designed these streets himself, using principles that no alien architect understood. Instead of fighting the planet's unique weather patterns, the city worked with them. When the daily storms came, the buildings channeled water into underground systems that irrigated the farms. When the winds picked up, the city's layout directed the airflow to power generators. It doesn't make sense, he had heard a Vorthak observer say last month. Their city violates every principle of proper urban planning. It should be a disaster. The Vorthak didn't understand that human cities had always been organic things that grew and changed. They built their own cities like fortresses, designed to last forever without modification. Human cities lived and breathed and adapted to whatever challenges came their way. In the agricultural zones outside the city, Jiwoo was performing another miracle that the aliens couldn't understand. She had taken Earth crops and Native Haven's rest plants and created something entirely new. Her hybrid grains could grow in soil that shouldn't support any complex life. They produced more nutrition per acre than anything in the Coalition's agricultural databases. The genetic modification is impossible, a ethereal collective. Scientist had told her during his inspection visit. Our computers show that these species cannot successfully breed together. The genetic structures are incompatible. Jiwoo had just smiled and showed him the flourishing fields. Humans had been mixing and modifying plants for thousands of years, long before they understood genetics or DNA. They did it by patience, experimentation, and intuition. The ethereal computers were very smart, but they had never learned to think like a farmer. In a secured laboratory beneath New Seoul, In-sung was testing something that would have shocked the coalition leadership if they had known about it. Nari's quantum communication theories had been proven correct. The device in front of him was small and simple looking, but it could send messages instantly across any distance. Earth control, this is Haven's Rest. He spoke into the device. Testing quantum link, day 412. Received clear and strong, came the immediate reply from Earth, 23 light years away. All systems functioning perfectly. The Coalition's fastest communication method required ships to carry messages between star systems. It took weeks or months for information to travel across their territory. Humans had just made that entire system obsolete, and the aliens had no idea it existed. Soo-jin worked in the materials laboratory, creating alloys that shouldn't have been possible with Haven's Rest's limited resources. She had studied the periodic table of elements that the Coalition had established, noting which materials they considered rare and valuable. Then she had found ways to make similar substances using common elements in human manufacturing. Techniques, their steel is crude. A Vorthak engineer had said dismissively after examining samples of human construction materials, barely suitable for basic tools, much less serious engineering projects. What the Vorthak engineer didn't know was that Soo-jin's crude steel was actually stronger and lighter than the advanced alloys used in Coalition starships. She had sent detailed reports to the Coalition Science Council, but like Hyojin's fusion drive research, her work was filed away unread. The real surprise came when Overseer Zithara arrived for her official inspection of the colony. She had expected to find humans struggling with basic survival, probably requiring additional Coalition support to prevent widespread suffering. Instead, she found a civilization that was growing faster than anything in Coalition records. "Explain this to me," she said to So-young as they toured the city. "Your species was classified as technologically primitive. Your social structures were deemed chaotic and inefficient. Yet this colony shows organization and productivity that exceeds our best projections." So-young tried to explain, but she could see that Zithara didn't really understand. The ethereal collective valued order, hierarchy, and central planning. They couldn't comprehend how thousands of humans could work together, without rigid command structures, how they could innovate solutions in real time without approval from distant authorities. "You have no supreme leader," Zithara observed, confusion clear in her crystalline voice. "No central planning committee. No standardized protocols for resource allocation. How do you coordinate large-scale projects?" "We talk to each other," So-young replied simply. "We see what needs to be done and we do it." This answer seemed to frustrate Zithara even more. In ethereal society, complex projects required years of planning, multiple approval levels, and careful coordination between specialized departments. The idea that humans could just see what needs to be done and accomplish massive tasks through informal cooperation was impossible for her to accept. What Zithara was seeing but not understanding was humanity's greatest strength. Humans were social creatures who had evolved to work together in small groups, but they had learned to scale that cooperation up to incredible levels. They could coordinate across continents and cultures, sharing ideas and resources without needing permission from central authorities. Minho noticed other things during the inspection. He was the colony's security chief, though the Coalition didn't think humans needed much security. Haven's Rest was in safe coalition space, protected by Vorthak fleets and ethereal technology. What could possibly threaten a peaceful agricultural world? Minho knew that safety was often an illusion. He had been quietly training colonists in combat techniques, emergency procedures, and survival skills. To outside observers, it looked like recreational activities and fitness programs. The aliens saw it as typical human paranoia, the behavior of a species that had never faced real danger. "Your people seem remarkably anxious about potential threats," Cythera commented, as she watched a group practicing what appeared to be dance moves. "Perhaps our protection protocols should be enhanced to provide additional psychological comfort." She didn't realize she was watching advanced martial arts training disguised as cultural activities. Every human on Haven's Rest was learning to fight, to survive, and to protect their community. Not because they expected trouble, but because humans always prepared for things that might never happen. The inspection concluded with Cythera filing a report that completely missed the point of everything she had seen. She noted human inefficiency and chaotic organization, while simultaneously recording productivity numbers that broke coalition records. She recommended continued monitoring to ensure that human anxiety behaviors didn't become problematic. Meanwhile, in space above Haven's Rest, human ships were beginning to arrive with increasing frequency. These weren't the simple transport vessels the Coalition expected. They were Hyejian's new designs, built with fusion drives that outperformed anything in the galaxy. The ships looked small and crude compared to massive Coalition vessels, but they could travel farther, faster, and more efficiently than anything the aliens had ever built. The Coalition observers noted the increasing traffic, but didn't see it as significant. Humans were obviously expanding their little agricultural operation, probably bringing more farming equipment and additional colonists. Nothing important enough to report to higher authorities. They didn't realize they were watching the beginning of human expansion across the galaxy. Every ship carried not just supplies and people, but also quantum communication devices, advanced manufacturing equipment, and most importantly, human knowledge and determination. Back on Earth, Youngsu was receiving detailed reports through the quantum communication network. He studied every piece of information about Coalition military doctrine, technology, and strategic thinking. The aliens were powerful, but they were also predictable. They had been using the same tactics for thousands of years, relying on overwhelming force and defensive positions. "They fight like they think," he told his staff during a planning meeting. "Everything has to be planned in advance. Everything follows established procedures. They can't adapt when something unexpected happens." Human military thinking was completely different. Humans had learned to be flexible, creative. The first reports came from the edge of the galaxy, so far away that most Coalition species had forgotten those star systems even existed. Scout ships found empty worlds where thriving colonies had been just months before. No signs of battle, no distress signals, just empty planets stripped of all life. General Kethler stood in the Coalition war room, studying the holographic display that showed the affected regions. Red markers indicated lost systems, and there were too many of them. Something was moving through the outer rim, consuming everything in its path. "What do we know about this threat?" asked Admiral Vextar of the Hegemony Fleet. "Very little," Kethler admitted, his scaled features grim. "No survivors. No intact technology left behind. Whatever is doing this doesn't leave witnesses." The emergency session included representatives from every major Coalition species. Everyone except humans, who were still considered too minor to participate in serious military discussions. Deho sat in the observers section, taking notes but not allowed to speak. 3 days later, they got their first real look at the enemy. A badly damaged ethereal collective research vessel limped into Coalition space, its crystalline hull scarred and flickering. The crew was traumatized, speaking in fragmented sentences about the swarm and endless hunger. They came from nowhere, the ship's captain reported to the emergency council. Millions of them. Small ships, but so many that they blocked out the stars. They moved together like a single organism. Our weapons couldn't stop them. They absorbed our energy blasts and used them to grow stronger. Overseer Cythera leaned forward. What did they want? Resources? Territory? Technological knowledge? Everything, the captain whispered. They consumed the planets, the atmosphere, the magnetic field. Even the background radiation. When they were finished, there was nothing left but empty space. The Coalition had faced threats before, but nothing like this. The Void Swarm, as intelligence services began calling it, operated unlike any known species. It moved without apparent strategy, consumed without purpose, and adapted instantly to any resistance. On Haven's Rest, Kyung-ho received the first fragmentary reports through quantum communication channels. While Coalition leaders debated and analyzed, he was already gathering his security team and studying the limited tactical data. "Show me the attack patterns again," he told his communications officer. Studying the holographic display that showed swarm movements, Yoonji, his tactical analyst, pointed at the projection. "Look at how they respond to Coalition defense fleets. The moment our forces establish a perimeter, the swarm shifts to surround them. When heavy ships move to intercept, smaller swarm units attack from unexpected angles. It's like they can predict what Coalition forces will do." Kyung-ho nodded grimly. "That's because Coalition tactics are predictable. Same formations, same responses, same doctrine they've used for thousands of years. If I can figure out what they'll do next, so can the enemy." While Coalition strategists focused on building larger defensive fleets, human minds were working differently. Yoonji studied the attack patterns and saw something that alien artificial intelligence systems had missed. The swarm wasn't randomly aggressive. It was learning, adapting, evolving its tactics with each encounter. "They're not just consuming resources," she told Kyung-ho. "They're consuming information. Every time they encounter Coalition forces, they analyze the tactics and develop countermeasures. By the time our forces engage them again, the swarm has already adapted. This was exactly the kind of pattern recognition that Coalition computers should have detected. But their analysis protocols were designed for conventional warfare against conventional enemies. They couldn't process the idea of an opponent that evolved its tactics in real time. Sang-woo was exploring the ancient ruins on Haven's Rest when he made a discovery that changed everything. Deep underground, beneath layers of rock that hadn't been disturbed for millions of years, his archaeological team found chambers filled with alien technology and inscriptions. "These symbols," he told Haiwan, the team's linguist, "they're not like anything in Coalition databases. The technology is completely different too, more advanced in some ways but also more desperate, like they were fighting for their lives." Haiwan spent weeks decoding the inscriptions, using pattern analysis software that human linguists had developed for studying Dead Earth languages. Slowly, a story emerged that made both humans realize the true scope of what they were facing. "The Void Swarm has been here before," Haiwan reported to Kyung-ho over secure quantum communication. "Multiple times. These inscriptions describe at least 3 previous invasions spread across millions of years. The species that built these ruins called them the Consuming Dark. The ancient records revealed tactical information that the Coalition had never encountered. Weapons that could disrupt swarm coordination. Strategies that had achieved temporary victories before ultimately failing. Most importantly, they revealed the swarm's fundamental weakness. They were a hive mind that couldn't understand individual thought. Every previous civilization tried to fight them with massive fleets and overwhelming firepower. Sang-woo explained to the growing audience of human military personnel. It never worked. The swarm just adapted to whatever they tried. But look at this section here. He pointed to a series of inscriptions that showed small groups attacking swarm formations from multiple directions simultaneously. The few victories they achieved came from unpredictable tactics. Small units acting independently, the kind of warfare that confuses a hive mind. Earth received this information and immediately began adapting. Chang Min, the fleet admiral, started modifying ship construction plans. Instead of building large, heavily armed vessels like Coalition dreadnoughts, human shipyards focused on smaller, faster ships designed for hit-and-run tactics. "Forget everything the Coalition taught us about space warfare," Chang Min told his construction teams. "We're not building ships to fight other ships. We're building ships to confuse and harass an enemy that thinks like a computer, but adapts like a living organism." The Coalition finally requested human assistance, but only in their typical limited way. They needed agricultural support for refugee populations and medical aid for traumatized survivors. Dal-Su, Earth's military attaché, agreed to provide humanitarian assistance while secretly coordinating the real human response. "Let them think we're just farmers and doctors," he told his staff. "The longer they underestimate us, the more time we have to prepare for what's really coming." Coalition forces continued to fight the swarm using traditional tactics, and they continued to lose. Massive defensive lines were outflanked and destroyed. Powerful dreadnoughts were swarmed by countless smaller swarm vessels. Ancient military doctrine proved completely useless against an enemy that learned from every encounter. Seijin, a human psychologist who had been studying swarm behavior patterns, made a crucial breakthrough while analyzing combat recordings from coalition encounters. She noticed something that military experts had overlooked. The swarm's reaction times were different when facing unexpected situations. Look at this. She showed her data to Kyung-ho and his staff. When coalition forces use standard formations, the swarm responds instantly. But here, when a damaged ship broke formation and attacked from an unusual angle, there was a delay. Just a few seconds, but measurable. Those few seconds of confusion were the key. The swarm's hive mind was incredibly efficient at processing conventional military thinking, but it struggled with true unpredictability. Random actions, individual initiative, and creative tactics created small windows of opportunity. They can't understand us, Seijin concluded. Their collective consciousness is so focused on efficiency and logical responses that they can't predict what humans might do, especially when humans don't follow any logical plan. This was humanity's advantage. Every other species in the coalition had evolved toward collective thinking, hierarchical structures, and predictable behavior patterns. Only humans had maintained their chaotic, individual, unpredictable nature. As the swarm pushed deeper into coalition territory, consuming entire star systems and defeating every fleet sent against them, human preparations accelerated. Ships were built in secret shipyards. Weapons were designed specifically to exploit swarm weaknesses. Most importantly, human tactical doctrine was refined to maximize the confusion that individual initiative could create. The coalition leadership remained unaware of human preparations. They saw humanity as a minor species suitable only for support roles. When the final desperate battles began, they planned to evacuate human colonies along with other non-combatant populations. They had no idea that humans were preparing to do something that no coalition species had ever attempted. Fight the swarm on its own terms, using tactics so unpredictable that even humans couldn't predict them. The ancient ruins on Haven's Rest held one final secret that Sang-woo discovered in the deepest chambers. Inscriptions that described the ultimate fate of every species that had faced the swarm before. They had all followed the same pattern: massive military buildups, defensive strategies, and ultimately, extinction. Only one line offered hope. Those who think as one can never defeat that which consumes thought itself. Victory belongs to those who think as many. Humans had always thought. The Void Swarm broke through the coalition's primary defense line on a Tuesday. By Friday, 3 core worlds had been completely consumed, their populations of billions reduced to empty space and cosmic dust. The coalition's mighty fleets, which had maintained peace for thousands of years, were being destroyed faster than they could be replaced. Jae-hyun stood on the bridge of the human ship, persistent, watching coalition dreadnoughts retreat in perfect formation from yet another disastrous encounter with swarm forces. The massive alien vessels moved like parade units, maintaining precise distances and following evacuation protocols that were older than human civilization. "Sir," called Yoo-jin from her communication station, "Coalition Command is ordering all ships to fall back to a defensive position Gamma 7 and maintain formation integrity." Jae-hyun studied the tactical display showing swarm forces, advancing like a black tide across multiple star systems. Coalition forces were following their standard doctrine: concentrate firepower, establish defensive perimeters, and engage the enemy from positions of strength. It was logical, well-planned, and completely useless against an enemy that adapted to logical tactics in real time. "Ignore coalition orders," Jae-hyun said calmly. "All ships break formation. Scatter into individual attack groups. Yoo-jin, activate quantum coordination protocol." His fleet of 30 small human vessels suddenly exploded outward like seeds from a broken pod. To coalition observers, it looked like panic or system failure. Ships scattered in all directions with no apparent plan or coordination. Some headed directly toward swarm forces. Others seemed to be running away. A few began moving in seemingly random patterns. What the coalition couldn't see was the quantum communication network that connected every human ship. Jin coordinated the chaos, turning what looked like disorder into a complex dance of coordinated attacks. Human ships struck swarm formations from 12 different directions simultaneously, hit their targets, and vanished before the hive mind could adapt. "Target the coordination nodes," Jae-hyun ordered, watching his ships confuse the enemy in ways that coalition forces had never attempted. "Don't try to destroy them. Just hit them and move. Keep them guessing." The results were immediate and dramatic. Swarm formations that had been advancing in perfect coordination suddenly began to hesitate. Individual swarm units started making mistakes, attacking empty space where they expected human ships to be. The hive mind that had learned to counter every coalition tactic couldn't predict what humans would do next, because humans themselves didn't know what they would do next. On the ground, the differences were even more striking. Woo-sung led human Marines in the first successful rescue operation of the war, extracting coalition civilians from a planet that was already half consumed by swarm ground forces. Where alien military doctrine called for strategic withdrawal when facing overwhelming odds, humans did something that shocked both their allies and enemies. They advanced. "This is insane," muttered a Vorthak soldier as he watched human forces move deeper into swarm-controlled territory. "They're outnumbered 1,000 to 1. They should be retreating." Woo-sung heard the comment but didn't bother responding. Vorthak soldiers were trained to fight in organized formations with clear command structures and predetermined objectives. Human soldiers were trained to improvise, adapt, and accomplish missions that officially couldn't be accomplished. Mi Kyung, the combat medic attached to Woo-sung's unit, was saving alien lives using techniques that violated every coalition medical protocol. She performed surgery in active combat zones, treated species whose biology was completely alien to human experience, and kept patients alive using equipment jury-rigged from battlefield salvage. "How are you doing this?" asked a wounded ethereal officer, as Mi Kyung stabilized his crystalline structure using medical nanites designed for organic tissue. "We adapt," Mi Kyung replied simply, continuing her work as explosions echoed around their improvised medical station. Humans are good at making things work even when they shouldn't work. The coalition had strict protocols for medical treatment, sterile environments, specialized equipment for each species, and careful adherence to established procedures. Human medics ignored all of this and focused on keeping patients alive by whatever means necessary. Their success rate was impossible according to coalition medical databases, but the patients were alive and that was all that mattered. In space, the real breakthrough came when Hoseok discovered something that changed the entire war. He was an engineer aboard the human flagship, responsible for maintaining ship systems under combat conditions. When a damaged coalition cruiser limped into the human fleet's operational area, Hoseok did something that coalition engineers said was impossible. He fixed it. "You can't repair a Vorthak power core with human tools," the cruiser's chief engineer protested as Hoseok's team swarmed over the damaged vessel. "The quantum matrices are incompatible with your technology. The safety protocols alone prohibit this type of cross-species mechanical interface." Hoseok ignored the protests and got to work. Human engineers had always been good at fixing things that couldn't be fixed, using tools that weren't designed for the job. They bypassed safety protocols, improvised solutions with available materials, and made impossible repairs that kept equipment running under conditions no manufacturer had ever imagined. Within 6 hours, the coalition cruiser was not only operational, but running more efficiently than it had before the damage. Hoseok had replaced several irreplaceable components with human-manufactured alternatives that actually worked better than the originals. "This is a violation of every engineering principle we know," the Vorthak engineer said, staring at readouts that showed his ship performing beyond design specifications. "Your principles assume you have unlimited time and perfect conditions," Hoseok replied, already moving on to the next damaged vessel. "Human principles assume you have broken tools, limited resources, and people shooting at you while you work." The difference in approach was fundamental. Coalition engineers followed strict procedures designed to prevent system failures. Human engineers followed flexible guidelines designed to solve problems regardless of available resources or working conditions. Sun Hee demonstrated this difference in combat piloting. She was flying escort for a convoy of refugee ships when swarm interceptors appeared from multiple directions. Coalition fighter doctrine called for maintaining formation, concentrating firepower, and engaging the enemy according to established air combat protocols. Sun Hee did something that Coalition pilots considered suicidal. She flew directly into an asteroid field, using the chaotic environment to break up swarm attack formations. Her ship twisted through spaces that shouldn't have been navigable, using gravitational anomalies and debris impacts to confuse enemy targeting systems. "She's going to get herself killed," observed a hegemony squadron leader, watching Sun Hee's ship dance through the asteroid field like it was built for that specific environment. Instead, Sun Hee emerged from the field having destroyed 6 swarm interceptors and suffering only minor damage to her own vessel. Coalition pilots had spent years learning to avoid dangerous flying conditions. Human pilots had learned to use dangerous conditions as weapons. The turning point came when Dae Sung, commanding a group of human vessels, realized how to exploit the swarm's fundamental weakness. The hive mind coordinated its forces through quantum entanglement, the same principle that allowed human ships to communicate instantly across vast distances. But quantum entanglement could be disrupted. "If they're using quantum coordination," Dae Sung explained to his fleet commanders, "we can jam it. Not destroy it, just add noise to their signal. Make their coordination imperfect." Human ships began broadcasting quantum static on the same frequencies the swarm used for coordination. It was like shouting random words into a telephone conversation. The hive mind's perfect unity became confused, fragmented, and inefficient. Swarm formations that had moved like single organisms began to hesitate and make mistakes. Individual units started attacking targets that other units were already engaging. The overwhelming coordination that had made them invincible became a weakness that human unpredictability could exploit. On the Coalition capital world, General Kethler watched in amazement as human forces accomplished things that his military experts had declared impossible. Small human fleets were engaging swarm formations 10 times their size and winning. Human ground forces were rescuing populations from worlds that Coalition strategists had written off as lost. "How are they doing this?" he asked his staff, studying battle reports that defied every principle of military science he had learned in 3 centuries of warfare. "They don't follow any recognizable tactical doctrine," his chief of staff replied, confusion evident in his voice. "Their formations are chaotic. Their strategies are unpredictable. Their equipment shouldn't work. By every measure we understand, they should have been destroyed in their first engagement." Kethler nodded slowly. The Vorthak Empire had built its military reputation on strength, discipline, and adherence to proven tactics. They had conquered countless worlds using strategies refined over millennia of warfare. Those same strategies were completely useless against an enemy that adapted to conventional thinking. The last Void Swarm node surrendered on a quiet morning, 6 months after human forces had turned the tide of what everyone thought was an unwinnable war. Taemin stood on the bridge of the human command ship Indomitable, accepting the surrender while Coalition fleets watched from a respectful distance. The surrender itself was strange. The swarm's hive mind had simply stopped fighting, broadcasting a single message across all frequencies. Unable to adapt, unable to predict, unable to consume that which cannot be understood. Taemin studied the final tactical displays, showing human ships scattered across 3-star systems in formations that still looked chaotic to Coalition observers. His fleet had just defeated an enemy that had consumed entire civilizations, and they had done it using tactics that violated every principle of military science that aliens understood. "Sir," called his communications officer, "we're receiving congratulations from Coalition Command. They're calling it the greatest military victory in galactic history." The irony wasn't lost on Taemin. For 7 years, the Coalition had treated humans as a minor species unsuited for military service. Now those same humans had accomplished what the mighty Coalition war machine couldn't. They had defeated the Void Swarm. The victory celebrations throughout Coalition space were subdued. Yes, the galaxy was safe. Yes, the swarm had been defeated. But the cost of underestimating humanity was becoming clear to anyone who bothered to examine the war statistics. Ji Young, Earth's new ambassador to the Coalition, stood before the Galactic Council holding a data pad filled with numbers that told an uncomfortable story. She had replaced Daeho, who was now serving as Earth's Minister of Interspecies Relations, a position that hadn't existed before the war. 70% of swarm victories came against coalition forces using traditional defensive tactics, Jiang announced to the assembled delegates. 95% of successful rescue operations were performed by human units. Human forces achieved a combat effectiveness rating that exceeds coalition averages by over 300%. The numbers were undeniable, but they raised uncomfortable questions. How had the coalition's greatest military experts missed humanity's potential so completely? How had a species they considered primitive developed technologies that surpassed coalition standards? General Kethler, his scaled features showing an emotion that few humans had ever seen on a Vorthak face, humility, stood to address the council. The Vorthak Empire formally requests human military advisors to modernize our tactical doctrine. Our traditional approaches proved inadequate against unconventional threats. It was the first time in coalition history that the Vorthak had asked anyone for military assistance. Their empire had been built on martial superiority and the belief that strength was the ultimate measure of a species' worth. The war had shattered those beliefs. Overseer Zythara of the Ethereal Collective was facing an even more difficult adjustment. Her people had based their entire civilization on technological superiority and logical efficiency. Human success through chaotic methods was challenging everything the Ethereals thought. They knew about how the universe worked. Request permission to establish joint research facilities with human scientists, she announced, her crystalline voice carrying none of its former confidence. Ethereal technology appears to have limitations that human approaches might address. The quantum communication technology alone was enough to revolutionize coalition civilization. The Ethereals had spent millennia developing faster-than-light transportation, while completely missing the possibility of instantaneous communication. Human scientists had achieved in years what ethereal researchers had failed to imagine in centuries. The political changes were inevitable. Hyunwoo, leading the reconstruction efforts in systems devastated by the swarm, was demonstrating human logistical capabilities that made coalition bureaucracy look hopelessly inefficient. Where alien relief efforts required months of planning and approval processes, human teams were rebuilding entire worlds in weeks. How do they coordinate these efforts without central planning committees? Asked a confused hegemony administrator as he watched human construction teams rebuild a city with apparent disorganization that somehow produced perfect results. The answer was something that coalition species had never mastered: trust. Humans trusted each other to solve problems without being told exactly how to solve them. They shared information freely, adapted to changing conditions instantly, and achieved coordination through communication rather than command structures. Su-min, Earth Strategic Planning Council Chair, was negotiating from a position that would have been unimaginable before the war. Humans were no longer asking for seats at the galactic table. They were determining who else deserved to sit with them. The human sphere of influence will include 57 star systems, she announced, to the Coalition Territorial Committee. These systems will be administered under human law and protected by human forces. There were no objections. How could there be? Human military forces had just proved they were the most effective in the galaxy. Human technology was advancing beyond anything the Coalition could match. Human colonization efforts were succeeding in environments where other species couldn't survive. Mincio watched the proceedings with mixed feelings. She remembered when Daeho had sat in the smallest chair in the Coalition Assembly, ignored and dismissed by alien delegates who thought humans had nothing important to contribute. Now those same aliens were competing for human attention and cooperation. Dongwu, directing the expansion of human colonies throughout former Coalition space, was amazed at how quickly everything had changed. The overcrowding that aliens had once seen as a human weakness was now recognized as efficient. Colonization that strengthened galactic civilization. Human colonies were different from anything the Coalition had seen before. They grew organically, adapted to local conditions, and achieved self-sufficiency in record time. More importantly, they welcomed refugees from species whose homeworlds had been consumed by the swarm. Humans are the only species that seems to thrive in mixed population environments, observed a grateful hegemony. Refugee living in a human colony. They don't just tolerate diversity, they use it to become stronger. This was another thing that Coalition species had never understood about humans. While aliens tended to form homogeneous societies with rigid social structures, humans had always been mongrels who absorbed useful ideas from anyone willing to share them. The final truth was delivered by Sung Ho, Earth's last representative to address the old Coalition Council, before it was restructured to accommodate new realities. His speech was brief, direct, and devastating in its simplicity. "You had 300 years to ask what we could do," he told the assembled alien delegates. "Instead, you told us what we couldn't do. You assumed that because we were different, we were inferior. You assumed that because we were peaceful, we were weak. You assumed that because we were new to the galaxy, we had nothing to teach you." He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering the final verdict. "The difference between asking and assuming just saved your civilization. The quiet species you ignored became the loud species you needed. We didn't change. You finally started listening." The new galactic order reflected these harsh lessons. Humans didn't seek to dominate other species, but they would never again accept being dismissed or underestimated. The Coalition's rigid hierarchies gave way to more flexible alliances, where species contributed according to their strengths rather than their status. Earth's ships now patrolled space lanes that had once been protected by Vorthak fleets. Human engineers maintained communication networks that connected every inhabited world in the galaxy. Human colonies served as safe havens for refugees and as launching points for further expansion. Most importantly, human military doctrine became the new standard for galactic defense, not because it was imposed by force, but because it was the only approach that had proved effective against unconventional threats. The aliens had learned their lesson too late to avoid being saved by the species they had underestimated. But they had learned it in time to build a new galaxy, where asking was more important than assuming, where diversity was strength rather than weakness, and where the quiet voice in the corner might be the most important one in the room. The Void Swarm was gone, but its legacy remained in the form of a galaxy that finally understood what humans could do when they stopped being told what they couldn't do. The sound of human ships launching from Earth every day was indeed thunder, the thunder of a species that had found its voice and would never be quiet again. General Kethlar, now working alongside human military advisors to rebuild Vorthak tactical doctrine, summed up the new reality in his final report to the Vorthak High Command. "We thought strength meant never showing weakness. Humans taught us that real strength means adapting to any weakness and turning it into advantage. They are not stronger than us, they are stronger than the situation requires. That is a very different kind of power. The galaxy belonged to those who could adapt, innovate, and endure impossible circumstances." The aliens had finally learned this lesson, but only after watching humans demonstrate it by saving them all